The University of Oxford's founding date is unknown, but evidence exists of teaching as early as 1096. The University of Cambridge was formed in 1209 when some of Oxford's instructors left after a dispute with local townspeople. I'm sure there's a story there. The two universities are often jointly referred to as Oxbridge, and I'll be talking about the roles of both that were played out during World War II. Hello, I'm Linda Shenton-Matchett, author, speaker, and history geek. During the research for my books, I unearthed tons of intriguing historical information that doesn't end up in my stories, so I've created this channel to share those tidbits with you. Both the universities were spared from heavy bombing, and most sources I found posited that the reason was that the Baedeker truce theory, a concept that harkens back to the Christmas ceasefire that occurred in 1914 during World War I. In many ways, the colleges functioned as they had, especially during the first 2 years of the war when the under 20-year-olds were not being called up. Classes continued, exams were given, and events were held. However, military duties in the Senior Training Corps and fire watching at night were added to the students' academic responsibilities. Other duties were assigned by the Joint Recruiting Board. Students were broken into various categories from cadets, state bursars, state scholars, to ex-service applicants, medically unfit, and conscientious objectors. The military used the colleges to run what were called short courses, 6-month accelerated programs that met specialized wartime needs and produced officers and technicians for the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Royal Engineers. As the war progressed, staff shortages abounded. A former student in one interview commented that there were no manservants because they had been called up. However, he did have a female bedder or bedmaker. How fortunate for him. Students submitted their ration books at the beginning of each term that were then returned at the end of the term. As another former student put it, they did not go hungry, but the variety of food was minimal, with bangers and mash being a frequent meal, as well as dried eggs, spam, and baked beans. One source indicated that the Ministry of Food constantly sent new directives controlling quantities and ingredients, as well as allocating suppliers. Military cadets billeted at the school, and members of the Allied forces often ate alongside the students in the dining hall. As with all of England, blackout requirements were strict, and there were several areas on the grounds that were off limits to students, such as the Bridge of Sighs and Newcourt. Fear of invasion was never far from anyone's thoughts, so the college was closed for the public. Passes were issued to students and staff, and RAF sentries were controlled access to various points throughout the campus. Basements were converted to air raid shelters, and tunnels under the streets were strengthened to provide additional shelters. The college's silverware, archives, stained glass, paintings, and rare books were evacuated to clergymen living in remote, rural parishes. The landscape of the college quickly changed as the grassland areas were converted to gardens, producing, as one source indicated, a bumper harvest of potatoes, wheat, and other cereal grains. Then in 1942, in what was considered a big deal, an acre of the paddock near the master's garden was dug up and also used to grow vegetables. More than 2,000 trees were taken down to supply timber for the war effort, and logs were also used instead of coal for fuel. A large steel water tank was installed in the area that's now the chapel that was to be used in the event of an emergency firefighting. The college sold the railings between the quadrangle and the paddock as part of a scheme to provide scrap for the steelmaking industry. And the railings along St. Andrew Street were also, quote-unquote, sacrificed. There's a report of a tussle with the Ministry of Buildings and Works, and the North Court railings were retained in the interest of safety. Huts installed were for use by the cadets, at time passed, lecturers and students enlisted or were called up, and of 370 instructors, only 143 remained. However, thanks to the arrival of refugees from outside England, some of the teaching positions were filled with such talent such as Luis Cernuda, who would become one of Spain's most acclaimed 20th century poets. His poem El Arbo was inspired by Cambridge's celebrated Oriental plane tree, thought to have been planted in the early 1800s from a collection of seeds from the battlefield of Thermopylae found during an expedition by a Cambridge academic explorer in 1802. Another visitor was Professor Frank Dobie of the University of Texas. A former student commented that he, quote, greatly enjoyed his time at Emmanuel despite the wartime deprivations, and later published an entertaining but thoughtful and informative account of his life in Cambridge. Rarely seen without his beloved Stetson, he was a notable raconteur and a popular addition to the college community, end quote. Cambridge was asked to house the London School of Economics that evacuated out of the city when war commenced. The partnership was considered highly unusual, considering the university's conservative outlook, as compared to the School of Economics' more radical reputation. By all reports, there were no issues other than housing. With Cambridge being full of students and military personnel, individuals enrolled in the School of Economics were billeted in private homes. Transportation was also a challenge because of fuel rationing and shortages. Bicycles were difficult to find, so most used public transportation for destinations that were too far to walk. One of the best-kept secrets at the university was the use of the senior combination room for the military planning of D-Day. It's unknown how many Cambridge students and staff served during the war, because there was no war list created after it had been done after the Great War. What is known is that 55 students, alumni, and staff lost their lives in the RAF, Royal Naval Volunteer Research, Expeditionary Forces, Royal Army Medical Corps, Tank Corps, and at Normandy. Like Cambridge, Oxford suffered the effects of rationing, the loss of students and staffs to the war effort, blackout restrictions, etc. Also like Cambridge, Oxford became a refugee for fleeing academics from around Europe. Historian and poet A.L. Rowse made observations about the impact of the foreign nationals to the city which seem to have been echoed in the college halls. He said, "One can discern the aversion to the crowded atmosphere, the unfamiliar faces, men and women who were differently clothed, behaved differently, maybe even spoke a foreign language, who disturbed the quiet idyll of the ancient seat of learning, with its centuries-old social conventions and practiced customs." It does not surprise, then, that the initial response at Oxford to the invasion of foreigners was lukewarm, to say the least. End quote. There was no unified response by Oxford to the refugees. Some colleges used endowments to offer grants to them, while other colleges did nothing at all. Tragically, as one source put it, despite England's fight against Hitler, the country as a whole, and Oxford in particular, clung to anti-Semitism and did not necessarily welcome their fellow scholars with open arms. Some of the college buildings were requisitioned for military hospitals, evacuee centers, and billeting. The new Bodleian Library provided underground storage for artifacts from Parliament and national museums. Other facilities were commandeered as blood transfusion centers and Red Cross branches. Cambridge was also the location of intelligence work, with several of the colleges being used by top secret government departments, such as Mansfield College, that served as a code-making department, and Harris Manchester College, that housed the Inner Services Topographical Department, which planned operations such as the D-Day invasion. Research done at the university physics department made a huge impact on the war, as did medical research from the development of penicillin to treatments for head injuries. Students and staff served in the armed forces as well as various government agencies from Bletchley Park to Special Operations Executive all over the globe. Many returning after the war picked up the remnants of their education and looked toward the future. Are you intrigued by the brave individuals who served during World War II? Check out my fictional series, The Resistance Chronicles, inspired by real people and real events. Check the details below for ordering information. Thank you for watching and have a great day.